is Chinese. And that's because I'm half German and half Chinese. So this is a very special presentation for me, not just in terms of research, but in terms of my own personal life. So when you think about Eastern and Western culture, there's a lot of differences, right? And we think that they're entirely different worlds. But let's just look at the entire world for a moment and the belief systems. The top 5 belief systems are atheism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity. They all seem very different from each other as far as how the world began, how you would live your life, how you would treat other people, how you would treat God, or even if there is a God, right? So the concept is, how would you describe each one of these belief systems in terms of evidence? Because most people think about religion in terms of faith, right? But I believe that there's actual evidence for and against each one of these belief systems. And I think that you're going to see that sometimes what we think is against is actually the same or supports each other. In fact, 2 of these belief systems might be closer than you think. In fact, they might share the same origin. So, if you think about perhaps a Christian viewpoint, let's say you come from a Christian viewpoint. The question still is there intelligent design for Christianity? Not just in what you learned as a kid, but is there design in nature, in your brain, in the hard wiring, in your health? Is there any evidence that what the Bible says is the way you should live your life is really the way you were designed? Is that the case? We're going to learn more about that tomorrow when we look at nature, anatomy, physiology. We're going to see if there's some kind of evidence for one of the worldviews. However, the problem with Christianity is that there's 33,000 different Christian denominations. So even if you decided on Christianity, how would you know which one is the actual accurate narrative? Because all of them claim to believe the Bible, but they all interpret the Bible totally differently, right? The other problem with Christianity is that it's a relatively new belief system. So some of the weaknesses in Christianity is that it was actually copied from older religions, if that makes sense. And of course, it's even worse with some Christian denominations who have basically come on the scene in the 1800s. So the question is, how would you really be sure how the world began? Since none of us was really there, right? But just like anything else, if you weren't there yourself, if you could possibly talk to somebody who was there, or very nearby as far as proximity in their time, if they were there shortly after the event, would you say that would be most reliable? What do you think? If you could talk to somebody, right? In fact, it would be better and most ideal if you could not only talk to the oldest civilization that was around, but also many of them, right? If you could talk to many of those individuals and say, hey, how did it all begin, right? If you had that ability, that would probably be the most reliable method to getting at the truth. So let's start with, which country has the largest number of atheists in it? What do you think? Yeah, it's China. Sure, it's not hard, right? China has over 1 billion people. The majority of them are atheists, right? So Russia is definitely not the answer because Russia's smaller. And Russia, there's a lot fewer atheists as time goes on with Russia. So definitely China. However, what was China before they were atheists? Anyone know? Yeah? Yeah, Confucianism, Buddhism was very big, right, in China. So even though they're atheists now, they're more like Buddhist Confucianists, right? There's Taoism also, but certainly I'd say Buddhism and Confucianism are a lot bigger in ancient China. So let's think about their civilization, because China is a very old civilization, and in fact, their language is the oldest continuous language on the planet that's still used today. So in other words, when I'm going to show you some Chinese characters, how many of you like Google? Anyone like Google? Google Translate? Any Google Translate fans out there? Not really. What you can do is you can go to Google Translate, go to traditional Chinese, and you can look up the words I'm going to show you, okay? So if you have any questions, feel free to review on Google Translate. What's interesting about the Chinese characters is that they are actually derived from pictographs. So the ancient Chinese characters were actual pictures of the word that they were trying to describe long ago. If you've heard of hieroglyphics, it's not quite that much, right? It's not quite that detailed a picture. But originally, the Chinese characters, traditional, were actual pictures of the structures they were describing. The other advantage for China is that China is a lot older than many religions. China, with its language, is around 2500 to 3000 BC. The first book of the Bible, just for comparison, was not written for over 1,000 years afterwards. How many here can actually speak Chinese and read Chinese? Oh, fantastic. Wow, maybe I can get you to come to the front. That would be fantastic. Or you can stay there, that's fine. I'm not going to push you to come up front. But let's think about China, okay? Understanding that their roots before atheism were Confucianism or Buddhism, how do you think they might say the word sky or heaven? What are your thoughts? How might they say that? Any thoughts? Like, remember, originally their language was pictographs. So how would you draw sky or heaven with maybe a Buddhist or Confucianist sort of mindset? What do you think? Like something blue, like clouds, sure. Anything else? Just to give you an idea, this word for sky or heaven is tian that I'm going to use. And what's very interesting is that this word can not only mean sky or heaven, but it can mean God. The concept here is when you look at the character tian, is it actually means the Great One. So when the Chinese look up to the sky or the heavens, they see the Great One. Now keep in mind that this symbol right here, this upside down Y, this can mean just a person, okay? So keep that in mind. So this is just like a person. The cross here makes you great, okay? And I hope you can understand why this is one. I don't think anyone needs an explanation for that. It's a line, right? So not so hard, right? The Chinese also have several other words for God. You can use the word Shanti. And Shanti is the heavenly emperor. There's Tian, we have up here. There's Shen. But there's also a word in Chinese for spirit. How might you say spirit? How might you draw spirit? What would you think? What might it look like? An angel, like something flying or whatever, possibly. I don't know if that's really Buddhist, though. That's more Judeo-Christian, isn't it? Probably not Confucianist, for sure. Well, interestingly enough, there's several words we can use. I'm going to talk about Gui later. But this particular word for spirit is ling. And ling can also for God. And Ling, the character, literally means the one over the waters in three persons that works miracles or magic. No, I'm serious. It is. You can look it up. Does that sound Buddhist? What does this sound like? Have you heard this description of the Spirit before? No?
By the creation of the earth?
Yeah, okay. So you've heard it in the creation account of the Judeo-Christian narrative, interestingly enough. Let's take a look at that. Genesis 1:1 tells us that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, where does the 3 come in? Why would it be 3? What sort of thought process has a sort of a 3-person God? That's also Western, isn't it? That seems to be like the Trinity. And certainly God, in whatever culture you come from, can work magic or can work miracles. But interestingly enough, God is not singular, both in the Christian worldview and also Ling. Let's think of a word that's not so religious. Okay, we're not going to talk about God now. Let's just talk about the word in Chinese for first or create. How might you draw the word first? Not too hard. What do you think? Or create. How might you draw that?
Line and dot.
A line? Yeah, maybe one line or a dot. Anything else? Create. Think of the word create. How might you draw that?
Like a rising sun.
Like a rising sun, sure. The first thing that you see in the morning. Absolutely. That's very Eastern too, right? It's kind of Japanese though, isn't it? But interestingly enough, the ancient Chinese, when they wanted to say the word create, what they decided to use was living dust man. That's first. So living dust man. Wait a minute. Where's that from? Does that sound familiar to you? Any firsts that you can think of that was a living man made from the dust? And again, this is the word for man, but it can be being, okay? Remember the upside down Y? That can be being, and also a little square, that can also be being, okay? That's entity or something like that, okay? So where do you remember this from? Well, I mean, doesn't it sound, in at least an uncanny way, like, again, the Western or Judeo-Christian, which could be Eastern, worldview? Because God formed Adam, who was the first man, from the dust of the ground, and he breathed into him the breath of life, and he became alive, right? How about the word create? How might you show the word create? You said sun, right? That's the first thing. But did you really create the sun? Like, what do you do when you create something? How do you create something? Yeah, with your hand. So you might use a hand, right? I mean, that's not that far of a stretch, is it? At least I hope not. But the thing is when you look at the Chinese, they decided for create that they would use a combination of 2 symbols. Walk and talk. That's very interesting. I hope you can understand how this is walk. I hope everyone can see that. That's not like a big stretch, I hope. But interesting, why is to create about walking and talking? And again, talk can be living dust man as well, just FYI. How is talking related to creating? Who, when they create something, talks? It's actually the Christian God, Jehovah, talks when he creates things, right? That's how he created not only the earth, but all things on it. Anytime he spoke, things appeared. So interestingly enough, Jehovah is not seeming that far apart from Shangdi at this point. But let's take a look at some other characters. This is just another way of looking at create, this next slide. How would you say the word finish or complete? Think about that. How would you say the word finish or complete? Try to guess the Chinese way of doing it.
Circle.
Oh, the serpent. Oh, no.
Circle.
Oh, circle. Okay, like the circle of life sort of thing?
Yeah.
Something continuous? Sure, absolutely. I think that's reasonable. Well, but the Chinese actually didn't decide to do that. They decided that the first two people in their home was complete. What two people?
Man and woman.
What two people?
Man and woman.
Huh, that's interesting. That sounds very similar, doesn't it? When you look in the Judeo-Christian scriptures, you find a very interesting concept. God creates man and woman, right? And that's right before the first time you encounter the word finished or complete. So what happened right before everything was complete? Well, the man and woman were created. Interesting, huh? Well, let's try something that's a little bit more graphic. How might you say the word garden? What do you think? How might you draw the word garden? Yeah, sure. Trees. Anything else? Flowers. Yeah. What might you see in a garden? Mucin, right?
Fruits.
Mucin, right?
Fruits.
Vegetables, fruit. But interestingly enough, the Chinese word for garden is just a kind of plain box with these lines. But, I mean, it's really technically a cross, but if you try, you could imagine that it's 4 lines coming out in the middle of it. Why would you have a garden like that? I mean, maybe it's just divided into plots or raised beds, right? Could that be the reason? Or maybe the reason might be that there were 4 rivers that came out in the middle of the garden. Huh. Isn't that interesting? Here's another word for garden, yuan. Yuan literally means 2 people from the dust in an enclosure. And again, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out the similarities, right? There's no flowers, there's no fruit, there's no vegetables in this symbol. It's 2 people of dust in an enclosure, yuan. Again, very, very striking similarity between that and the Christian narrative. So, where did God place the garden according to the Christian narrative? East, yeah. However, to the Chinese, where would the garden be? Yeah, sure. It'd be west, right? Does that make sense? Does everyone understand why it would be west? I mean, you can't get any further east than China. You like jump over to Japan, right? Does that make sense? And amazingly enough, the word in Chinese for west is 1 person in the garden. Huh. Interesting, huh? Doesn't sound very Buddhist anymore, does it? To the change in Chinese, what would you describe like an adjective, or not really an adjective, something that you can't really touch? Like something like happiness. How would you say happiness? How would you draw happiness?
Smiley.
A smiley face, sure, absolutely. Something happy. Anything else? Like, maybe someone jumping up and down or something? I don't know. I think that's a pretty easy thing to delineate, isn't it? However, to the ancient Chinese, true happiness was God with 1 man in the garden. I don't think it's very difficult to derive at this point what direction we're headed. What about the word necessary or wanted or desire? Now, mind you, there is a negative word in Chinese that we're going to talk about, but this is the positive word, okay? So this isn't like coveting something that shouldn't be yours. This is something necessary, desired, and wanted. What might you do to draw that? Well, the Chinese just decided to just add the woman to the happiness mix, and there you go, right? You've got necessary and desire. Oh, sorry, it disappeared. I'm so sorry. Let me go back. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So you just add the word west to woman, and then you have all you need, right? That's great. How about something a little bit more esoteric? How about the word naked? Now, mind you, there are several words in Chinese for naked. This is a positive naked. And people say, well, how can you have anything positive if you're naked? But think of it like pure or unadulterated or something like that. I mean, that's, a positive sort of word for naked. How might you say naked in a positive way? Innocent. Yeah, but how might you draw that? How are you going to draw that? Who's going to draw innocence? Like a baby, maybe? I don't know. Could you do that? Is a baby innocent? Anything else? Well, let's think about it this way. According to the Christian account, what did Adam and Eve originally wear? Do you remember what they wore?
Pure.
What?
Pure.
Nothing.
No, wore. What did they wear? Like, what did they have on them?
Nothing.
Light
Oh,
Light? Where do you get that idea?
out of the Bible?
Show me in the Bible where that is.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't exist. I'll
Okay.
tell you that right
Sorry.
now. You said that Adam and Eve were clothed in light. Where did you get that idea? What religion are you?
Christian.
What denomination of Christian?
I'm an Adventist.
Yeah. So you're a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, and you claim that Adam and Eve wore light. Now, it's very interesting because you can search the entire book of Genesis, and you won't find any hint of that anywhere. Adam and Eve, according to the Bible, in Genesis 2:25, didn't wear anything, okay? Adam and Eve were naked, but they were not ashamed. But how do you get that sort of dichotomy? How is it possible for you to be naked and not be ashamed? Well, if you were covered
with light.
with light, right?
Or you're just not ashamed.
Or you just don't know, right? Exactly. Maybe they just didn't even know that they were naked, right? Because later in Genesis, you're right, God says, who told you that you were naked, right? So that seems to be kind of hinted at later in Genesis. But what's very interesting is that the Bible seems to have a different account here than the account not only in Genesis, but for the ancient Chinese, the word naked is guangguang. Now, guangguang is made up of two words, guang and guang. So hopefully that's not too hard for you. But you know what's very funny is, do you have any guesses as to what the word guang might mean? Did I talk to you about this before the lecture, by the way?
No.
I did. Okay. So what do you think, as a Seventh-day Adventist, that the word guang might mean in Chinese?
A person or
A person covered with what?
Light.
yeah, light.
Covered with light. The word guang means
Light, light.
light. And if you look at the word, the derivation is a person as the base of the word. For the ancient Chinese, naked literally means two people that are shining. Two people that are indeed covered in light. Now, I'm willing to wager that no one, by any stretch of logic, could have derived that. So I want to know why you said they were covered in light. Where did you get that idea?
I guess when it's not directly from the Bible, it's from one book of Ellen G. White.
Which book is that?
Tell me. Or Patriarchs and Prophets? Maybe?
Interesting. So you said that your church's writings said that Adam and Eve were clothed in light. When was that book written?
1890.
So that book was written 5,000 years after this. Right? So this is 2500 BC, this is 3000 BC that you're looking at. You're telling me a book that was written in 1890 said that? Interesting. Interesting. Well, let's read that passage then. Adam and Eve did not wear any artificial garments, but they were clothed with what?
Mit einem Lichtgewand.
But not just light. They were clothed with something else. What else? Light and what else? Glory. Well, it's in the English, sorry.
That I want to say.
But I can tell you,
Glory of God.
there is no way you would have guessed that had you not had access to prior information. There's no one in their right mind that would come up with the word naked being two people in light, except for you. There's no way. No way.
Oh,
But interestingly enough, the passage that you referenced in 1890 seems to indicate that they were not only clothed with light, but they were also clothed with glory. So I decided to take a look at the symbol for glory. And what do you think the symbol for glory is going to look like? Take a wild guess. Two people, like what? Two people with what?
With light.
With light. Okay, that's reasonable, because based on your passage, that would be a reasonable guess, right? But it's actually a little bit different. When you look at the word for glory or splendor, you find it is again two people, but it's more inflamed above or covering a tree. Do you find that interesting? What tree is this? Is it apple tree, maple tree, birch tree? What were these two people in the beginning above or around? What tree?
tree of life.
The tree of life. That doesn't sound very Chinese, does it? This is 5,000 years before your book was written. How is it possible that the author of that book would know that? How would she know that? The Patriarchs and Prophets book from your denomination is from a woman named Ellen White that was born many years ago, but not 3000 BC. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But she seems to give a very accurate description for the word naked and also for the word glory
Yeah,
and
I would-
splendor in the ancient Chinese language. Your denomination is very small compared to worldviews. 20 million people. Certainly not the billions of most of the other major worldviews. And it's also very relatively young. Your denomination came into being around 1844, so less than 200 years old, even younger than my country, the United States of America. So the problem with that is that the more recent your denomination, the higher the risk of you copying someone else who was before you. How did your Ellen White, the author there, how did she know that Adam and Eve were clothed in light? How did she know that? How could she possibly know that? Something that differs from her by about 5,000 years.
I would get the idea from Genesis also,
Show me a verse that gives you that idea.
because they are created in the image of God, and God's glory and they reflect His glory.
How do you know God is covered in light?
That's other scriptures
When were those scriptures written?
later.
Over 1,000 years after these symbols. Find that interesting? I find it amazing. Let's take a look. When you consider, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't put this up here. So this is, see this symbol? This is the symbol for being or person, and they're kind of shining, but that character right there means flame. Flame over or above or covering the tree. Let's think about something more negative now. Why was there suffering according to the Judeo-Christian worldview? What was the thing that resulted in suffering? Yeah, what did they do? In what?
They ate from the tree.
Yeah, they ate the apple, right? They ate the apple. God said, don't eat the apple. And they said, we're going to eat the apple anyway. So, right? Badness. Right? Very bad. So let's think about this concept. If I were to tell you, don't do something, okay? Or something is forbidden, how might you draw that? Don't do that. Das ist nicht gut für dich. How would I draw that?
An X sign.
An X, sure, like a circle, and a slash, an X, right? Pretty simple, right? But how do you think the Chinese would say it? What's the first thing that was ever forbidden? Oh, so you think it has to do with trees? Huh. Interesting.
Just if they knew something about the trees.
Well, something about the trees. Okay. Well, interestingly enough, the word for forbidden is jin. Jin means God telling you something about the two trees. What two trees? Is he telling you about an apple tree and a pear tree? What two trees are these? Well, what two trees were prominent in your world?
Yeah, the only two trees we are thinking about is the tree of life and the tree
of life
good and evil, or
and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That seems to be just literally straight out of Genesis. Something that's jin, forbidden, is God revealing something about the nature or something about these two trees. Are these two identical trees? Are these two birch trees, two pine trees? Are they different trees or the same trees?
Different.
Yeah, sure. You can see that they're different, right? Which one's bigger? This one, right? So the one on the right is the larger tree, right? You see this guy? His branch is kind of like truncated. Does that make sense? So it's not the same two trees. It's two different trees. But let's see how they're different. God said you can eat from any tree, but don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because if you do that, you're toast, right? You're going to die. So any thoughts as to which tree is which? No? Not yet? Well, we'll think about it for a while.
The right.
Okay, the right one is what?
Life.
Tree of life? Wait, why would you say the right one? Where did you get the idea of the thing on the right being the correct choice? This isn't the red pill, blue pill.
I'm
Okay?
right-handed.
So, interestingly enough, you probably got that again from your religion, because your religion believes that in their other writings as well. The right side is the side of favor in your religion. And that's true in other passages in your writings. Also, in another place in your writings, that it said the tree of life was larger than any other tree. So that's kind of a reasonable derivation to say it's the one on the right. It was larger and surpassing in glory all other trees. And your writings actually describes the color of the fruit, interestingly enough. I haven't found a a symbol for that yet, though. Let's take a look also as to where the trees were. In this Chinese symbol, are the trees far apart? No, they're next to each other, right? And in your writings, they're also next to each other, interestingly enough. And they were next to each other for a reason. The reason they were next to each other is that Adam and Eve had to be exposed to Satan's temptations. That doesn't seem very nice, does it? I mean, if you're going to make paradise, why put the deadly poison right next to the tree of life? Who would do that? Why would you do that? Why in the world would you do that? Why not hide the tree of knowledge like out back in the corner? Why would you do that? Why would you put it next to the other one?
Giving them the opportunity to decide.
Sure. Because in your religion, sin is about choice, right? Not all Christian religions believe that. The Catholic religion believes that sin is nature. But in your particular branch of Christianity, you believe that sin is a choice. And if you don't have two options, you don't have choice, right? Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about the devil. How would you draw the devil? How would you draw the devil? A monster?
Fallen angel.
What would he look like? Black. What does he look like? Draw it. Draw it.
Angel of light.
An angel of light. Now wait a minute. Why in the world would you say that? Because if you were the devil, if you appeared as the angel of light, that would be kind of like deceptive, don't you think? Don't you think that would be kind of deceptive? Now why do you think that the devil would appear as deceptive?
Because he was first Lucifer.
Okay. When did the devil first encounter our race? Was he himself? Did he say, "Hi, I'm the devil"?
No.
Well, he was a snake, right? So he wasn't himself. So the ancient Chinese, to convey the word devil, is gui. And gui means there is a secret man alive in the garden. That is the word for devil. Again, no horns, no dragon, no snake, no whatever. But there's a secret man alive in the garden. Very, very, again, clear description of what narrative? Your narrative, right? Narrative of Genesis. The serpent was more subtle than any beast that God had created. And this serpent wasn't really the serpent, but it was who?
The devil.
The devil, right? So the devil was where? Where was the devil?
In the garden, or as serpent
In the garden. Do you know where he was in the garden?
On the tree of.
Now, wait a minute. How do you know he was in the tree? Where did you get that idea?
I thought so.
Yeah, but where did you get that idea?
Doesn't it stand in the Bible?
No.
Oh, okay. So I guess I got it again from Ellen G. White.
Oh, okay. Who's Ellen G. White again? What did she write? What book?
Präs, prophet.
Yeah.
Or the
So,
Präs.
you're telling me that you believe that the devil tempted Adam and Eve from the tree, right? That's not in Genesis, by the way, FYI. But what's also interesting is that your writings say that the devil was in the Garden of Peace and he was lurking. Like when you lurk, are you out in the open? No, you're hidden, right? You seem to understand that, not only from the book of Genesis, but from your writings. It also kind of gives the same idea. So let's talk about the word tempter. If someone's going to tempt you, how would you draw that? You said the devil tempted them where? in the tree, right? So how might you draw tempter or temptation? What do you think? What? The devil in the garden. In the what? In the tree, right?
Tree.
Let's see if you're right. Well, the devil is hiding in the two trees. That is actually the character for tempter. But again, where in Genesis does it say he was in the tree? It doesn't. It's not there. It's not there, I'm telling you. But you knew. How did you know again?
From the book Patriarchs.
From the book Patriarchs and Prophets that was published 1890. So 5,000 years ago, your denomination claims that they knew this. How did they know? Because I know that the Chinese knew because they were there. They were the first civilization on the scene. But 5,000 years later, you somehow have access to that information. You also know that it was not a serpent that tempted Eve. You knew that it was the devil because of your background. And of course, you happen to know that the devil was again in the tree, which is really, really weird. But interestingly enough, your writings again say that the devil worked under disguise, in deception, and he was unperceived. So you knew that, not only from the Bible, but from your writings. And in this clear passage, you have the identity and location of the serpent, where? In the tree. Not found in Genesis, but indeed found in your denomination's literature, and your denomination is very small. How would you say the word covet or desire? Like something you shouldn't have, okay? Something that's, bad for you. How would you say something was coveted or desired? Or let me just say this. Who was the first person in the human race that coveted or desired something? Who was that? Eve. What did she want? What did she want? The fruit. And what do you know? The word in Chinese is the woman approaching the Jew tree. No surprises now, right? Chinese were not Buddhist before. Buddhism didn't come into China until about 600 BC. The Chinese before this worshipped Changdi, Tian, Chen, and Ling. They worshipped the God of heaven. They worshipped Yahweh. They worshipped Jehovah. Because the same narrative that you read in your Bible, and interestingly enough, your Patriarchs and Prophets, is the story of the Chinese characters. Unfortunately, Eve desired to eat from the wrong tree. She did not choose the right tree, sadly. And of course, something happened at that point, right? How would you say naked in a negative way? How would you say naked in a negative way? You could probably guess it at this point. What are your thoughts? Two people without light. That's interesting. But here's the concept. When did they lose that light?
After sin?
As soon as what?
After sin.
Yeah, but who? Which one? After which one sin?
Both.
Which one? Why do you say Adam? Show me in the Bible that says that. It doesn't say that. How do you know it was when Adam sinned that they
White.
Yeah, who said that?
I think.
The only way you're going to know that is, again, we're going to have to go back to your book and not the book. There is no way that you can derive that the word for naked is man plus fruit equals naked. It's not woman and fruit. Okay? It's man and fruit. And the reason why you knew that, I mean, there's other words. It's not just man and fruit. I mean, there's other words in Chinese that can be negatively connotated for naked. But your writings actually shows that it was not after Eve ate the fruit. They were still covered in light in your narrative. But when the man ate, what happened? Then the light disappeared, right? I find that very interesting. There is no way you could possibly know a detail like the order of who sinned and where the light would disappear or when they become naked. Because the Bible doesn't give you that detail, but your book seemingly does. How would you say the word sorrow or pain? When did sorrow and pain appear in the narrative for the Judeo-Christian world? It had to do with what?
The two trees?
Yeah, the two trees again. So again, the two trees are kind of a big deal, right? Even though in the Bible, the two trees are only mentioned in 2 verses. Did you know that? But interestingly enough, the two trees are kind of the big theme here. Have you noticed that in the Chinese characters? The two trees keep coming up over and over again. And this literally means taking a piece of the two trees. But if you derive it a little further, it's actually man. You see the man here? Right? You are under the man because of the two trees. Who is under the man?
Woman.
The woman, sure, exactly. So the first time you ever encounter sorrow or pain in the Judeo-Christian literature, it's basically part of the curse of sin, where as before they were equals, now one was placed in submission to the other. Okay, how do you say the word guard? How would you say the word guard? The word guard in Chinese is bao. So, who was the first guard and what were they guarding in the Judeo-Christian worldview?
The two angels in front of them.
Yeah, exactly. So Adam and Eve get kicked out, right? And what is the angels guarding? What are they guarding?
The two trees.
Yeah, they're guarding, not particularly the two
Tree of
trees.
life.
Which tree are they guarding?
The tree of life.
Yeah, that's right. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve, kept eating
That's not
that.
what the
They guarded which? Which one's this
The
one?
big one.
Yeah.
Large.
This one's the tree of life. So the word for guard in Chinese is a man at the entrance of the tree. No shield, no sword, no police, but the entrance to the tree of life. The first guard in our world. Because when God drove out Adam and Eve, he did not guard the way to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What did he guard? Tree of life. Right? Because if man were to eat from the tree of life, what would happen to sin? Immortal. Right? So the two trees come up a lot. But what's very interesting is even though there's only 2 verses for those 2 trees, in your denomination, the 2 trees are a big, big deal. Because the 2 trees are basically the destiny of humanity, right? They represent not only life and death, but what else? Knowledge. Okay. What else they represent? What was the whole point? It wasn't that they ate from a wrong tree. That wasn't the issue, right? What was the issue?
Obedience and
Obedience and disobedience is the issue, right? It's the issue for the two trees, and it's the issue for your denomination. It's called the great controversy belief in your denomination. The two trees of Genesis represent if you're going to do things your way or if you're going to do things God's way. It's that simple. Right? There's not like three groups of decisions. It's not A, B, C, D, or E, whatever. It's just A and B. Either you do it God's way or you do it your way. And after they were driven out of the garden, what happened to their kids? Do you remember that story? They had kids. Do you remember who they were? Were they girls? No, they had two guys, right? So let's look at the Chinese word for brother, okay? How would you say the word for brother? I know you probably won't know this, but this is a very Eastern concept. These two symbols are actually the same word. They mean brother, but one of them means older brother, one of them means younger brother. In the Chinese characters, you need two different characters to say the word brother. Does anyone know which one is older brother, just by the way? Yeah, it's this one right here. That's right. Now, the reason why that one is older brother is not rocket science, okay? It's not like really hard to figure out. But this one actually has a hidden character in it that I'm not going to address in this presentation, but I'll hopefully do it sometime later. But the way you say older brother is just the man, right? This is the symbol for man who speaks. Does that make sense? I hope that's not a very big jump for you. But in the Eastern way, in the Eastern cultures, the spokesperson is the oldest male. Does that make sense? The patriarch. Not rocket science. So who was the older brother? What was his name?
Cain.
Cain. And what did Cain do? What did he distinguish himself by? What did he do?
Killed his
He
brother.
killed his little brother, right? So in the narrative of Genesis, Cain actually kills Abel, right? So let's think of the word for murder. How would you say the word for murder? What do you think? How would you draw the word murder?
In this context, older brother killing younger brother. Or
Oh.
Both two signs.
Oh, interesting. So you put both the signs. Actually, it's not that, unfortunately.
Okay.
It just means someone with a mark on them.
Okay.
Where's that come from? Well, let's look at the word for violent person or cruel person. The word for violent or cruel person is older brother with a mark on him. Where's that from?
Cain.
That's the mark of Cain. Right? Older brother commits murder, becomes violent and cruel. No sword, no dead body, just older brother with a mark on him. Where's that from? Again, we have to go back to the Western, the Christian worldview to derive the Eastern symbols of the ancient Chinese. When you look at God, right, he put a mark on who? And was Cain black? Is that the mark? No, of course not. The purpose of the mark was to do what? Was to protect him, right? So we don't know exactly what the mark looked like, but I can tell you, this looks like a mark. It's an X, right? I think most people would derive mark with an X, right? Not really that complex. But if you really want to look into the character deeply, the Chinese number for 7 is qi. And qi looks a lot like what? Looks a lot like an X, doesn't it? In fact, there's no other number that looks like an X except for qi. Now, tell me, why would it be 7? Where's that from? Where did that come from? Where was that derived from? where do you think we're going to find it? Well, it happens to be in the Bible again, right? Because if anyone killed Cain, what was the vengeance? 7. Oh, right? Are you thinking that they were really Buddhist or Confucianist? What do you think they really were? The God of my fathers was the God of the Bible before the Bible was even written. So what is the opposite of sin? Okay, well, we'll end on a positive note. What's the opposite of sin? Obedience. Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. What do you guys think? What's the remedy for sin? Either you are full of sin or you are full of righteousness. Sure. Mercy would be an interesting one. But let's look at the word in Chinese for righteousness. Interestingly enough, in English, righteousness is 3 syllables. In Chinese, it's just 1 syllable. Yi. That's it. Yi. Yi means righteousness. And the word in Chinese for righteousness, anyone want to take a wild guess? What is the remedy for sin? Take a guess. A cross? Well, who was on the cross? Who was on the cross? In your worldview.
Jesus.
And what does Jesus symbolize by? Okay. And what do you know? The word for righteous is the Lamb over me. Yi is the Lamb covering me. And the word for me is hand and knife. So literally it means my hand takes the knife, I kill the lamb, and he covers me. My fathers understood the gospel of Christianity. And they felt it was so important that they embedded the story in the very fibers of their characters. 1,000 years before the first letter of the Christian Bible was written, 5,000 years before your prophet claimed to have seen the creation event, my fathers. And they recorded the remedy for sin for all generations to come. Though they did not know who Christ was, they were told that the Lamb would come one day and would cover them and make them clean, make them righteous. Ling, Tian, Shen, and Shanti are Yahweh, Jehovah, and Jesus Christ. In both the Christian worldview and to the ancient Chinese, their gods are one and the same. The story that is told in the first 11 chapters of Genesis is the story told in your book, Patriarchs and Prophets, is the same story told in all the Chinese characters. The narrative is one and the same. And in fact, your book is required for several derivations of the Chinese characters. You can't just get it from Genesis. You need all 3 to have perfect harmony between East and West. Who's the lamb? Right. The lamb is not a big figure either in China. You know, it's more pork and stuff like that in China, right? So it's kind of a funny symbol to use, but nevertheless, it's there. In your book, Patriarchs and Prophets, we find that Adam, with his hand, had to take the knife and kill the first symbolic offering. And he realized that that lamb that he killed was to be one day the Son of God, Jesus Christ. In the Christian worldview, the way you are righteous is by substitution. There is somebody who is righteous, who is holy, that is covering you. That is totally different from Buddhism. That is totally different from all other religions. All other religions, you are justified by your hand and your works. In the Christian worldview, it is your hand that acknowledges your sin and asks God to take your place for the punishment. Completely different worldview from Buddhism, completely different worldview from Hinduism or Confucianism, but perhaps not the ancient Chinese, but the ancient Chinese were one and the same with that Western worldview. Finally, how do you say the word example? Or how would you say the word example? I don't think we have to play a game anymore, right? Who is the greatest example?
Jesus.
And what did he do, which was the greatest example? What act of his life was the greatest example?
Serve?
He went to the cross.
He went to the cross to do what? To give us what? To give us eternal life. The Lamb was raised on the tree to give us eternal life. And which tree is this? It's the bad one.
Short one.
Jesus Christ did not die for our good works. Jesus Christ died for our sins because we have all chosen the wrong tree. The word in Chinese, for example, is yang. And yang literally means the lamb lifted up on the tree to give eternity. My fathers understood the fall of our parents. My fathers understood why they fell. My fathers understood that legacy continued in their children. My fathers understood even the flood, the Tower of Babel. There's so many more symbols. You can look them up on your own. But most importantly, my fathers understood that one day there would be a remedy for sin. And one day the human race would come back to eternal life. Not 100 years, but 1,000,000 years. And they told their people in their language the path of longevity. They told not only their people, but they embedded it in the oldest language on this planet so that all who would might have the Lamb to cover them and give them righteousness. There is much knowledge and wisdom from the ancient Chinese. There is much technology that came out of their civilization. But the greatest thing that my fathers gave to this world and to their posterity was a knowledge of the way of salvation. A knowledge of our purpose in this world. Our purpose in this world was not to serve ourselves. Our purpose in this world was not to desire things we shouldn't. But our purpose in this world was to live forever. Our purpose in this world was to worship Shangti, to worship Tian, Qian, and Ling. And by worshiping them, to do good to our neighbor, and not killing our brother, not hurting our brother. But unfortunately, our fathers knew that there was no way out of the curse of sin for humanity. And that's why the word for righteousness has nothing to do with your works, but it has everything to do with the Lamb covering you and his sacrifice for you on the cross. Definitely not Buddhist. Definitely not Confucius. Perhaps we've thought that we are very different. Right now there's protests going on, right? We're really not that different after all. The Eastern culture, the oldest Eastern culture, is actually one and the same with the Western view of Christianity. In fact, one and the same even with your small little denomination. I encourage you, if you don't understand Chinese, it's okay, you don't have to. You can look them up. You can kind of figure out that this is a tree, right, without having to speak Chinese. Maybe the lamb is easy to figure out. Do you see the horns here? Can you see that? You can kind of derive a lot of these characters. But you could certainly look up on the internet. And what I believe that as you search you will find not a clash of cultures between East and West, but the most beautiful harmony, not only in this planet, but a harmony that will bring you even to transcend this life that we enjoy now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Riesenberger. Und vielen Dank auch an euch alle für die 1,5 Stunden Geduld, die wir hatten. Es war ein sehr, sehr spannender Vortrag, wie ich fand. Es war interessant, das mal zu sehen. Trotzdem wollen wir jetzt noch die 10 Minuten geben, die wir immer am Ende geben, um Fragen zu stellen. Es ist immer ganz spannend, die Fragen zu hören. Wenn man eine Frage stellt, das ist auch eine Sache, die andere auch haben. Also traut euch ruhig, Fragen zu stellen. Wir werden 10 Minuten Zeit dafür geben. Und gleich noch die Bitte mit dran, wenn ihr diese Feedback-Zettel seht, füllt sie gleich mit aus. Das hilft uns immer sehr viel Planung für die nächsten Events. Also 10 Minuten Fragezeit. Are there any questions?
Yes, Jan, what's your question?
Wie kamst du zu dieser Art Vortrag hier? Wie kamst du for Tuesday?
Yeah, Christopher, are you?
How do you make it to this presentation?
How did you keep this project?
Oh, a friend of mine who's a linguist from actually Italy sent me, it was actually Eugenia that sent me the character for ye. And she said, did you know that your language has this word in it? And I was just like, what? That's crazy. So then I started studying like all the Chinese characters. And what I found, they're all the same. They tell the same story. Not just in the Bible, but in Patriarchs and Prophets, in your book. Next question. Yes?
Is there no documentation of the beliefs of the Chinese in those ancient
Sure, there's lots of documentation. It's right there. It's right there. The problem is that if you look at these characters before they were pictographs, but now they're like phonemes. It's like actual sounds. Does that make sense? So if you look at this, a Chinese person would not see the Lamb on the cross in eternity. They don't see them separated out. What they would see would be like, it would be like me telling you the word firefighter has the word God in it in I-R-E, and you'd say, what? Right? It doesn't make any sense to you because you would pronounce the symbols as sounds now. But the original derivations are so uncanny that there is no mistaking that they believed in one God. And they worship the one God of Christianity. As far as the documentation, yes, many people have documented this, but the thing that I want to kind of share with you is not merely the similarities between Chinese and generic Christianity, but a specific form and narrative that they gave. They gave a very detailed narrative for the account. And of course, like, the flood is there. If you have like like a little boat, if you want to say big boat, it's little boat plus 8 people. Why is it 8 people? Well, obviously, right? 8 comes from the 8 people in the ark, right? So it's just Tower of Babel, same thing. It's all the same narrative. And the thing is now, it's more difficult to derive the story because there's a simplified Chinese used in mainland China, Red China, right? However, these symbols are still used today. I mean, Red China doesn't own Hong Kong. They don't own Taiwan, right? I mean, they still use the same symbols that I'm showing you. So It's not just documented, but it lives on. It's here, right now. You can ask any Chinese person and fact check me with anyone you want. You can say, does this really mean the word lamb? Does this really mean righteousness? What does this mean? You can ask Google Translate. You can ask whoever you want. And they will tell you the story. Next question. Oh, yes. No, wait. We're going to give everyone a chance first, Jan.
Did you ever have a Chinese audience, and how is their reaction? And according to the
They like fall out of their seats. They fall out of their seats.
Can you repeat the question?
Have I presented this to Chinese people? They fall out of their seats. They're like, I can't believe that this is in my language. Or it takes a long time for them to understand. Like one time I shared it with an individual on the airplane. And of course she wasn't Christian. She was like atheist, whatever. And it took her 10 minutes just to understand Yi. Because I said, okay, so draw the word for righteousness. She's like, I said, well, draw the word for lamb. Draw the word for me. And I said, okay, put the lamb over me. Huh? Well, put the lamb over me. What? Take the character, put it, squash it on top of the character. Really? Okay. Okay, now what does that character say? Oh, okay. And I said, who's the lamb? I don't know. Okay, what major worldview has the lamb as its central salvific figure? Oh, is it Jesus? Oh, okay. So, because they have no background. They're like, I'm telling them letters mean heaven, right? That doesn't make any sense to them. Because when they see it, they don't see a picture anymore. They just see a sound.